the Afterparty. I'm Robert, and Zeb is here with me. And tonight we have Dave Benner. He's history man extraordinaire, and I'm going to talk to him about a few different things. And welcome, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Robert, and thanks, Zeb. Really appreciate being here. I was really ecstatic to hear you guys wanted to talk secession, and that is one of my favorite issues. So thanks for bringing me on board.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite too. I actually started a Facebook group for it, secession and decentralization, or something like that. It's tiny, but I'm hoping it grows over time, get some interaction in there, because I think that's in the long run, that's the only way we're going to be free and peaceful.
I see a lot of the little. I mean, I'm talking secession. I mean, let's get counties seceding from the state. You know what I mean? I mean, if it forces the issue and a discussion, then it's kind of like the Civil War. You look at the Civil War in East Tennessee, majority of the counties seceded from Tennessee. I don't know, just all the craziness that we see in legislation or state level here lately. You see on ballot access. Just got me thinking, got me in some type of way. But I think we jumped the gun a little early. It's still going a little early right there on the silent circling, but we're still learning the system. But Dave, secession, Tennessee, a history of disobedience. How much is America founded in succession? Like, isn't that what, in essence, what America is?
In so many ways, I would say so. I would say secession is one of the most cornerstone axioms of the American political system, and it's so unique in that way. Under the British constitutional system, for instance, secession was treason. I would concede that. But under the American political system, the delegates to the Philadelphia Convention, those that formed the Articles of Confederation, those that assisted with the writing and dissemination of the Declaration of Independence, were a generation of secessionists. And even before that, for instance, in the colonial times, the bottom three counties of Pennsylvania seceded from colonial Pennsylvania and formed its own colonial charter, secured the charter with Britain. And Pennsylvania's decided, well, it's not moral to interfere with this. These people want to create their own society. It's self-governing and it's self-determination. There's other examples too. For instance, Vermont was formed originally out of what was called the New Hampshire Grants, where certain grants of land decided, people within those tracts of land decided to form their own colonial assembly. And again, they formed their own government. Now, New York maintained a claim that, hey, what is Vermont at that time is New York, but those people didn't. So this goes even before the Declaration of Independence. This is one of the predominant American political theories, and it's unique to the American experience. And it's not something that you can find in many other parts of the world where any kind of secession would be immediately interpreted as rebellion. And that's happened in American political history, to be sure, but it's not the original axiom and original kind of thoughts behind the principle.
Right. I mean, the big secession we all know about is during the Civil War. I know some people here in the South like to call that the War of Northern Aggression. Give it a different name, but even before the Civil War and after the United States became the United States with the Constitution, we had northern states threatening secession, if I remember correctly. My history is mostly what I got in the public schools, and I don't remember reading that in the public schools when I was growing up. But I'm starting to learn some from different sources now, and it seems to be that some of the first talks of secession were from northern states.
Certainly were, actually. As soon as 1795, a group of senators met in what was called the Closet Discussion. Rufus King of Massachusetts, along with John Taylor of Caroline from Virginia, and Oliver Ellsworth of Connecticut, met together and said, hey, this thing isn't working. There's too many sectional differences. We need to shelve this thing and work within our states to bring that to fruition. In 1803, for instance, when Thomas Jefferson secured land from France in what became known as the Louisiana Purchase, the same cries for secession rang out in Massachusetts and in Republican New England when states were saying, hey, this is going to diminish our relative power over the Union. Adding all these new tracts of land, this is going to add more states. Power in Massachusetts, for instance, will be diminished. Also, in the War of 1812, what's known as the Hartford Convention met to oppose the war aims of James Madison, because he had kind of floated the idea of conscripting minors to serve in that war, an extremely unpopular proposal in New England for good reason. In those cases, delegates from several states went to Hartford to determine what to do about this, and some of the most prominent politicians in the country were overtly calling for secession. So this has been discussed many times in the North before it was in the South after the Republic was formed. But even before that, I mean, the Declaration of Secession was a declaration that announced the reasons for which the colonies were leaving Great Britain. In the same way, the Articles of Confederation and then the Constitution, there was a divide between that period, whereupon states decided to leave their governmental arrangement under the Confederation system and adopt a new model. So secession had long been an American principle, long been actualized before the Civil War.
Yeah, like you're saying, the Declaration itself says when one group of people want to separate, and that's essentially secession right there in a nutshell. When one group wants to separate, they should say why and then do it.
The curious thing about it too is how it fits into modern context. Like what does that look like when you start talking about, like, you made a good point last week, Hammett, about you kind of was hoping Trump would have won because you thought California would succeed. And that begs the question. I kind of think they probably would have done that. I could see them trying to do something like that, and that would have worked out better for us, right?
I think so. My point with that, Dave, was that if Trump would have won in 2020, that there were states talking of secession. There's just a little rumblings, between 2016 and 2020. But I think if Trump would have won, there would have been some states like California, New York, maybe that would have been so outraged that the secession talk would have really ratcheted up in those more liberal areas. And if they had decided they wanted to go, I think conservative states would have said, okay, see ya. But right now, if we were to have conservative states do that under Biden, then there would be I don't think the liberal states would let the conservative states go the same way the conservative states would let the liberal states go.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I mean, these secessionist movements that have broken out over the last decade, 15 years or so, are really interesting. I hate to say some of them I'm a little bit quizzical as to how earnest they are, because some of them seem more tied to who's in office than an actual philosophical adherence to the idea of secession. For instance, as you mentioned, California and the Cal exit kind of movement has become more prominent when Trump is in power. People are more boisterous in support of that, especially those that would be of the progressive mindset. But in Texas, for instance, there was cries for secession when Obama was president. So ultimately, I think it's unfortunate that a lot of people are more attached to their tribes than they are the principles. But it is interesting, and it's encouraging whenever you see someone be, very consistent on that. I'm not so sure most people support it in the abstract, just because of how pervasive the Lincolnian myth is, and how much people buy into the idea that, this is a perpetual union. It was meant to be indissoluble, and it has something of an onus of a religious coding around it. It just can't be torn by any kind of political movement. So,
right, and it certainly seems like that way. I mean, it's especially since Lincoln, that if anybody brings it up, then you're tearing apart the one nation indivisible thing, like we have in the pledge. That we're one nation indivisible. Why do we have to be? Is what I always want to ask. Why do we have to be? And I don't. We don't need to be. And if we were able to break that apart, like you say, philosophically, ideologically, and as opposed to based on personalities, then I don't know. I was going somewhere with that, but now I'm thinking. I don't think America has it in them to get off of personalities anytime soon.
A lot of it is there has to be a vocal different option than what you have in Democratic and Republican. You have in recent history, one of the most divisive elections where people polls, even major polls are screaming, I think one was 76% of the population would be open to a third option. third party option, and you have this funneled energy, and it's all about loyalty. It's all about loyalty of the peasants, us, to the new aristocracy that is politicians. And the way I see it, this is the way I've begun to view it with my scope of the world, of our country, because it was hard coming back from 2 deployments. And, I remember when Black Lives Matter first happened, I was mad. You know what I mean? And it took some hard conversations with some family from Virginia. Shout out to the Callahan clan. To realize that's not what people that died for freedom, they didn't die for the anthem. They didn't die for, and we're not even going to go into the basis of the war. Like, I won't even go into that, because I think we're all probably all three in firm agreement that's unconstitutional and that we don't need to be there. But besides just the very idea of America is the fact that I can have the freedom to express what I want to say and think for myself, essentially. And I personally do stand for it and say it because I guess of personal ties to my service to the military. So it's a little different. But with that being said, I'm not offended by someone not. You know what I mean? And that's that idea of breaking away. I think that we need to be more individuals, less collective. We really need to get back to these grassroots feels. And that's one thing about this. You were interesting about, both of y'all were talking about secession, like within states, like in Pennsylvania. Then also I mentioned Tennessee during the Civil War. That all has a grassroots feel, and I feel like that's the way out of a lot of like what the identity politics that we're running into. Like, we got to somehow get away from like, hey, let's not talk about Biden and Trump today. Let's talk about what's going on that was just voted down by Tennessee legislators today, ballot access, where a Democrat, it kills me, has the gall to talk about free and fair elections and then say, well, in Tennessee, you're only a Republican Democrat. Representative Shaw from District 80 said that. I think it was yesterday when that went down. It blows my mind. I kind of went on a rant there. I don't know where I was going with it either, Rob. But, it's just insane. You have this massive collective that you can't break out of the basic talking points. They're echo chambers. There's no thinking for yourself.
Right. What I would add to what you said, Zeb, is that the beauty of secession is it can be obtainable by anyone, regardless of ideology, their culture, their personal preference, lifestyle preferences. Really, proponents of secession that are the most, purely in support of it on a philosophical basis would say, hey, if Vermont wants to lead its own kind of Marxist socialist bastion, let them do it, and just don't let us exert force on them to stop it. In the same way, hey, if Mississippi wanted to create its own republic under its own design, let them do so as well. Neither of you have to abide by the tenets and maxims and laws that your society creates, but just leave them alone. It gets as simple as live and let live, and that's really the original American philosophy.
That is, and I've told people repeatedly, I'm tired of the people of California trying to tell me what to do here in Tennessee. And they're probably tired of the people in Tennessee holding back their progress. What they would see as progress, what I would see as becoming more authoritarian, they see that as progress. Well, let them have it. If that's what they want, I don't have a problem with it. Let them have it, and let us sort it out. There was some, I can't remember what the issue was in Virginia in the last few years, but there are counties there that started a process to secede from Virginia and become part of West Virginia.
Gun laws. I think it
was
over
the gun laws.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. I doubt that's gotten anywhere. And I'm not sure what kind of process would. Well, let's start there at the county level. What kind of process would counties have to go through in order to separate from Virginia, let's say, and become part of West Virginia? Sir, I think there's a constitutional precedent for that somewhere. It seems like I read about it recently, but I can't remember what. It's like a chunk of one state left and went to another, but I can't remember what it was.
Well, Zeb mentioned that some of the eastern counties of Tennessee essentially tried to do that during the Civil War. A famous example is the Free State of Jones, it's called, in Arkansas, where a group of, I think one county seceded from Arkansas during the Civil War. I would say that having a county secede from the state government, while I would totally defend that on a natural rights basis, I don't think it has the same constitutional fortitude as a state separating from the union. And here's why.
Right.
In the case of the states and their relation to the union, the states created the federal government. That's what my book is about, actually, and how the states predated the federal government and entered into a compact with each other to create a central government with limited enumerated powers, most of which are articulated in Article 1, Section 8 of the current Constitution. But in the cases of the counties of the states, those counties were almost always set up out of the administrative convenience of the state government. So the state governments actually have drawn the lines of most counties. Now, I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying it lacks as much, I think, of a legal defense as having a state secede from the union. But the process through which to do it, there is some precedents that have happened from time to time. There's cases back in the colonial times when the states started talking about independence from Great Britain, where supposedly some of the counties seceded from the British Empire prior to a state government. An example like that is called the Mecklenburg situation. I forget which state that occurred in. But it would really involve having, Republican delegates representing the people of that county meeting, passing resolutions, and then, essentially trying to ward off any use of coercion to prevent it.
Right. And there's a Callaway County in Missouri, where I used to live there, and they seceded from the state of Missouri during the Civil War also, and became the Kingdom of Callaway. And they still celebrate an annual fair festival kind of thing called the Kingdom of Callaway Days, which is excellent. I never got to go to it.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'm thinking
I want to go.
Cool. Because Missouri had in Missouri they were officially a slave state but did not secede. But part of the government that wanted to secede went to Springfield and set up their own state government, and it was a very contentious area. That they had battles. Going on before the Civil War started, like in the late 1850s, with people from Kansas coming raiding plantations in Missouri, and the people from Missouri going back and raiding places in Kansas, kind of like a pre-Civil War thing based on slavery issues.
Totally. Actually, exactly what you described also happened in Kentucky, where during the Civil War it was so polarized between factions that supported secession and factions that didn't. So that played out in a lot of the middle states, but you're totally right.
And I think this part of Tennessee was very pro-union.
Your part of it was.
Yeah,
there's no farmland, no agriculture.
Don't make me complicit in that.
Right, I don't.
I'm just kidding.
The Civil War. That's the thing. A lot of people get misconstrued about that is that they think that slavery was like some widespread phenomenon without the South. When the truth about it is, slave owners were really just about 1% of the population. You had the mass population of white people were pretty much sharecroppers, serfs, in a sense. So, it was corruption rife within the Confederacy as well, which ultimately led to their demise. I think if they would have freed the slaves or took Robert E. Lee's advice and conscripted them, gave them a pathway to freedom, I strongly believe that you could have probably created a couple armies that at least made the war last 10 years, if not just 5. But it's neither here nor there. I want to do a hot take real quick. I want to do a hot take on something. Let's say we live in a world where Donald Trump won. Got the recount, they won. California succeeds. Who's going with them? Your opinion, Denner.
Who's going with them?
Yeah, who's going with Cali and Cal exit?
Well, I think I would move there pretty quickly. To
really?
be honest with you. Yeah, and it's not because
I
feel like some kindred cultural association with California, but if they could sustain that without living with the taxes and debt burden that the United States government in aggregate throws upon them, I'd be willing to deal with their higher relative state taxes. California could stand on its own as a republic. It's one of the biggest economies in the world if you look at it that way. And even though, I think that there's some wrong-headed guidance in government there, it would work to the benefit of both parties. And I would want to be a part of it despite my proclivities against wanting to be part of it culturally.
Yeah, they're set up for it. They've got ports, they've got international. They got large airfields. They've got ports,
right.
and they've got excellent farmland. I mean, they've got Hollywood. I mean, if any of the states in here could do it, it would be California, Texas, maybe New York or something. You know, the big ones. But California could probably actually pull it off.
What I find interesting is like the alliances you would see in the aftermath. You know what I mean? Like, what would it theoretically look like? You know, based on it, when you take into account everything, currency, military, you know, and how would that pan out across the board?
Totally. How would like Oregon react? Geopolitical things, monetary concerns, trade, setting up some kind of national defense apparatus. There, it's hard. Some of these things are murky, and it could play out in many different ways. I'm not a prophet or seer. I can kind of give the ideological basis behind it, but some of that is impossible to fully predict. I don't think it has to lead to bloodshed. There's been secession that has been bloodless and secession that has been bloody. The latter of which is really kind of the media narrative is, if secession happens, it's going to be bloody, it's going to be bad, no one's going to like it. I don't necessarily believe that.
No, it's really interesting you mentioned that, because the last time I listened to Jeff Deep speak at the Knoxville Civil Asset Forfeiture event, he spoke quite a bit on soft succession. And if you want to explain that a little bit, that would be great, because you're probably more familiar with that term and how it's in context than I am.
Honestly, I'm probably not. So I'm intrigued if you have
an
idea.
So
about
soft
that.
succession. He was talking about the idea of political leaders, and I might be misquoting him. I'm not quoting him, but the idea that it's become so accepted for like the past 10 years, the narrative is still there. It's still talked about, that it could be possibly what you were talking about being peaceful, essentially the same thing, rather than a bloody succession. It could be a soft succession. And Democrats and Republicans have been super relaxed talking about it here lately. That narrative's flipped since Trump's lost, though, because they got their guy, and they got the Senate, and they got the House. And, well, you know, they got the table, so I don't think they want to succeed now while they got their hand, good hand. You know, but you know what I'm saying. Opposed to what you were saying, succeed when someone's in office. But yeah, that's what he was saying, is that's an option. You know, I'm curious, like how, like monetarily, how sustainable that could be. You know, not sure. I wonder if it would look like some type of what was it they did just here recently in Europe, the
Brexit
Euro, kind of like how they collaborated on that. I wonder if it's something like a new currency, but it would be the same thing, a big fiat currency, just print money. I'm sure. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I don't think the dollar is sustainable wherever it is, just because the Federal Reserve and quantitative easing. I'm sure I'm in good company, you know, espousing that. But currency can be traded regardless of whether you belong to the country that, you know, emits it, right? So like even during the American Revolution, the most commonly circulated currency in the United States was not the British pound. It was actually Spanish coins, like the Spanish silver and gold coins. Money is just a medium of exchange. It can be used wherever. The state would have some time to create its own currency if it wishes. Unfortunately, most currencies today are not backed by any bullion or tangible asset. And that's the bigger problem, I think, than, you know, what would happen in the case of secession. What do you guys think?
It would probably be easy for somebody like California to just keep using the dollar, but then they don't have control over the distribution and the printing of that dollar. So are they going to be losing purchasing power because of something that the rest of the that Washington, D.C. is still doing? You know, and I think that could set them on a downward spiral quicker than it would, you know, the federal government in D.C. still, because at least we still sort of would have some sort of theoretical backing. But I think it would be weaker if California left, or another state even. I think states leaving would greatly harm the value of the dollar much faster than it's going to right now.
Sure.
Well, this is why I mentioned it, and to your point, Dave, I completely agree. The only thing that truly backs the dollar is the military might. The United States military is the true backer of our currency. And you kind of see it in a weird, strange way in how we share technology and arm our enemies across the globe as a currency in a weird, weird, messed up way. But anyways, if there was a fraction of the union, would that system snap? Like, because if it's the military that is the backer of the nation, if that the backer of the dollar, if you win the world war, you get to have the main currency in the world. That's how it goes. And you have that. If that faith is gone, what does that do to the economy? And to your point, California is set up for it. They really are. I would imagine like there would probably be like a southeastern union, and then like maybe a northeast corridor. I don't know. I'm not sure. I think a lot of people would hop on with Oregon. I really do, and they'd probably be smart for their situation. But here's that payoff, though: no more guns, no more like that's seriously like shutdowns. Like COVID comes back, you're living in your house. You can live off this UBI. We're rich enough, we'll give you a UBI. I don't know. It'd be super weird. It'd be like a dystopian future. I don't know, but kind of like to see how it pans out.
Yeah, I think that it'd be presumptuous to think that the way in which Californians live today would necessarily be the same, say, 5 years after they secede. Because after seceding, I think that would draw in a lot of people interested in that idea, in that premise, that not necessarily would have supported California and its government and the way it postures itself in the political landscape the same way. For instance, I think you'd get a lot of kind of like these John Birch Society right-wingers to move in, and then there'd be an electorate that wouldn't be as willing to ban guns, for instance. But who knows? It's tough to say. You could be right. They're definitely culturally dissimilar to, say, New England. So there is that consideration, too.
Yeah, I kind of, like you were talking, Zeb, there'd be like a northeast corridor. I kind of figured if we did split in any way that like the West Coast would kind of go as a chunk. I mean, that I figured Western Washington and Oregon would probably go.
They wouldn't let Arizona come, though. They wouldn't let Arizona come.
Yeah, and then the Northeast would do their thing, and the Southeast would probably do their thing. But I'm not sure where Texas would fall, or like the upper Midwest states. Like Missouri it could go with the Midwest, or it might come down with the Southeast. But what's Michigan and those states going to do? They're going to they don't have any good ports. I mean, they got the Great Lakes, but then they got to go all through, basically between Canada and the Northeast states to have any sort of port access, or down the Mississippi. But that whole
what does Tennessee do?
Yeah, we lose a lot of port access. That affects your trade. So you're going to have to be at least allied, or in some way with places that have ports, so that you can get the goods that you need.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing about secession, too, is one of the most prominent arguments against it is, the seceding state or county or what have you would be less powerful to defend itself. And that could be true off the get-go, but the beauty of this is by actualizing political authority, any group, any unit political-wise, whether it be county, state, or even larger, has the capacity to enter into compacts with other states, with other unions, with other countries. That's exactly what the United States did in various times in its history. The United States didn't even have really a navy per se for a long time and relied on naval support from other powers. Japan and Canada don't really have big standing armies whatsoever, but they rely upon their ability to enter into compacts with other powers for defense. Same goes with trade. You're right. Actually, sometimes when the country's been really fragmented, there's been, rampant protectionism. An example is in the 1780s under the Articles of Confederation. But again, yeah, you can enter into trade agreements, but you're right. A country will never flourish as much if it's isolated from trade, and the navigable waterways and transportation and logistics is a big part of it.
All big considerations. I mean, you mentioned standing armies. I would imagine it probably would look like, two, maybe three big chunks that it would probably pan out to. I would be curious on how that would split up militarily. That compact, I do see a purpose for a standing army. I wonder how it would be a compact. It'd be back to what you were saying it was originally based off of, and now that it's instead of a contract, it's a forced situation. It's kind of like what we're seeing now. It's just weird times, weird times. You think we'll ever see it in our lifetime?
Unfortunately, I have to say no, though I wish I could say yes. And the reason being is that I just don't think that people are educated enough on this. People are educated to demonize secession and people that espouse it and advocate it to such an extent that it's almost like they'll just be like, well, the Civil War settled that. So the prevailing view is that the imposition of a larger amount of force can settle moral questions. I don't think that's true. And unfortunately, in this day and age, I think it's even less likely than, say, 3 years ago, because the states themselves have been some of the most tyrannical agents of exerting authority, especially right now in the landscape of the post-COVID lockdowns. And you have militaries roaming the streets in some places, riots that are not stopped. You have all sorts of behaviors that the government engages in, shuts down complete sectors of business, and then just says, well, sorry, hey, you're on your own. And this is for a public health crisis. I just think that people see their local units exerting so much more violative force that it's less likely now. Maybe on a county level, but even then, it's hard to say. What I will give some of the counties credit for is there are counties out there with local law enforcement and sheriffs that say they won't enforce certain things. Like there's some movements to create, gun sanctuary counties and things like that, whereupon the state agent in charge of law enforcement would not allow firearms to be seized. But even that's, beyond stretch of secession. So sorry, I guess I went off a long time.
Oh,
No, you're good. I was up way too late last night and went up way too early. The counties, I've seen some of those with the COVID stuff, and I've been really appreciative of the ones that have said, no, we're not enforcing that. Our county sheriff said we don't have the manpower or the willpower to enforce these mask mandates and stuff, but then they did. I know they ticketed at least one bar for having 13 people in there when you weren't supposed to have more than 10. And I thought, well, apparently you do have the manpower and the willpower. So it's, which always gives me concern is, if you're not going to stand up something as that violates our rights as much as that, then I really have no confidence that you're going to protect our rights in the long run. You're going to protect our rights as long as we are compliant, and that's not rights, that's permission.
And to your point, Dave, we were talking with Eckel, what was this past Tuesday, and he had made the point that if anybody has learned anything the past year, that never again should we shut down. That it was an abysmal failure. If you look at the states that shut down, and then states that just, or countries like, let's say Japan, never shut down, instituted safety measures, which, just don't shut me down. We can debate about masks later. I just don't shut the economy down. You know what I mean? But if you look at it, safety measures versus draconian shutdowns, the safety measures won out every time, had better numbers. The shutdowns, like New York, where we got a guy, Cuomo, up there who is a murderer, but they're talking about his harassing his aide. The guy's a murderer. You go back, let's talk about him shoving away COVID patients in a nursing home. Let's talk about that anyways. New York, California, worse numbers than the other mentioned, like Japan and such like that. So if anybody's learned anything in the past year, that shutdowns don't work. The social ramifications of it, the mental ramifications of it, educationally, say what you will about public education, it does serve a purpose. And you're looking at places like San Francisco, one of the most liberal cities in the nation, is their constituents are suing their leaders because they haven't opened school back up in 365 days. In California, you know what I mean? In Chicago, the same thing you're seeing. You know what I mean? Shutdowns do not work, and that would be a good basis for secession, in my opinion. But I don't know. I don't think the states would have the gall to call that against the almighty dollar, the federal dollar, and everything. You scratch my back, I scratch your back. Let's keep laundering this money through unconstitutional wars and paying each other off. My bad. What? What did I just say that?
So-
It's true though. It's true. What do you think, Hammond?
Well, Dave, if I want to jump a little sidetrack here, Dave, if you don't think we're going to have secession in our lifetime, do you think we have much chance with nullification? Do you think there are enough states or states that I haven't seen it yet? You start to see a little bit of it, glimmers of it. I would like to see some nullification where he says, and they don't have the back that I know of, is that we're not going to enforce your federal gun laws, and we don't mean new things that are constitutional. We mean all of them that you've all passed. We'll take care of our own state laws, and they might have very simple, but we're not going to enforce anything. And we're going to essentially do like they did during the Fugitive Slave Act and say, not only can you not enforce them here, we're going to push you out. We're going to make it difficult to even lock you up for trying to enforce.
Oh, certainly. And I'm a little bit biased here because I contribute to the 10th Amendment Center, and we put nullification really at the forefront of what our organization pushes. So I'm a big advocate for it. I talk a lot about it in my book, and you kind of touched upon it. But for your audience, if someone isn't aware, nullification is the idea that the states individually, as part of the compact that created the Union, have the ability in last resort to determine whether an act of the federal government is unconstitutional. And if it does so, can use its own state resources to prevent the enforcement of that act within its sovereign boundaries. So, I'm a big fan of it. We've actually seen some successes in this regard. It's usually on certain issues. I'll just say the most prominent one that has been nullified in practice is marijuana.
Right.
Back a few years ago when Colorado stood up for it, a lot of people thought that, they'd be threatened with punitive financial repercussions for this. The feds would withhold money, things like that. And Washington stepped up, and then California stepped up, and there's a few more other states that have stepped up to various degrees. Some states only have it medicinally, etc. But the feds have been powerless to really maintain a law enforcement dictum on this. They still maintain that, it's illegal and, it's against federal law, but the states are allowing this regardless. We've also seen some successes in right to try legislation, which pushes back on some of the FDA's mandates against certain drugs to be used. In Idaho, actually, they passed a bill, and I want to say 2015, that nullifies in practice all future federal gun control. And that's a pretty good step. It's not a perfect step. We would like to see all gun control nullified in every state, at least if you're under the same political philosophy that I think all three of us are operating under. But we've seen some progress here, and it doesn't always get mainstream media attention, but this is happening even today without much coverage, without much support from either or coverage from the media and Democrat, Republican establishment. It's all on the basis of single issue coalitions that we're forming within the states. So,
yeah, that's great. As a libertarian, I would like to see more libertarians in office, and then we could really work from a legislative angle, those single issue coalitions, and say, we're going to nullify all federal drug laws. We're going to nullify, or even all future federal drug laws or all future gun control laws. But I would prefer they get all of them rolled back. But hey, if we could at least say no more, that's a place to start. And then you can start picking away at the rest of them over time. And if we can get some Republicans and some Democrats, to come together, like some Republicans to go with Democrats to get the majority, to get that issue taken care of in a state, I say hit it. And the 10th Amendment Center is one of my favorite social media things. I love what they're doing. It's good stuff.
Great to hear that.
You talk about, as a libertarian, would like to see more libertarians in office trying to push a narrative like, hey, nullification, which I completely agree is something is attainable. Just like where I kind of agree with you that secession is probably not within our lifetime because of how strong the backing of the U.S. dollar is, the military might. That's there's no gold. It's the military might, fiat currency. That's what holds it all together. And everybody's kind of adherent to it by the states. But nullification is for sure a step in the right direction. And it's sad to see that in our state, like how much fight we're getting about just trying to get ballot access. Like, it's such a it's crazy, such a crazy argument that you have to sign up as either R, D, or I. I mean, 56,000 signatures versus 25 signatures, but the state constitution calls for a fair election. It's crazy. But hopefully, maybe the appeal works, and to your point, maybe in 2 years, what is it? 2 years, a year and a half, we'll get some libertarians elected. I don't know. That's a good hope. I know the guys there at the Mises Institute, the Mises Caucus, would love to see that, as would I. Wasn't there talks about Scott Horton coming to Tennessee at some point? Is that still in the talks?
So he was possibly going to come and speak to the state convention, but it turned out, from my understanding, that the state party convention committee didn't intend to have speakers for a long length of time, and they were doing a poker game and such anyways. So, but I think he's been open to traveling a lot over this next year. He will be going to several of the state conventions, and I have it on good authority that he'll become a delegate this year. He'll try to become a delegate, get more involved in the party this year, which is awesome. Nice. He is such an invaluable resource and really the paramount source for foreign policy theory from a libertarian perspective. And the guy is such a brilliant genius when it comes to recollecting facts about all these wars. It's really crazy. If you ever get a chance to meet him, he's interesting. He swears a lot, and he's kind of like a skater dude. He's a really interesting guy.
Hey, when I hear him on a podcast talking about, what happened in Iraq, and he goes on, and it's like he doesn't breathe for 20 minutes, and he says more in that 20 minutes than I could probably hope to remember in a lifetime. And it's just the amount of information he has in his head. It's unbelievable.
No, I've been diving into his. I've just recently discovered him. I don't know. I've discovered him about 3 or 4 months ago. I'm just disseminating information as it comes through, and I completely agree. And a lot of things kind of ring true just on firsthand memory of deployments and such, and just kind of craziness. For example, in Afghanistan, we're just a state there to protect the poppy, essentially. You know what I mean? The trade of it, essentially, or have a hand in it, and it's just it's crazy. It's crazy, but we won't go off into that. I would like to see him. I mean, I don't know. I would like to see the Afterparty try to support something to get an event in East Tennessee, at least. Maybe Knoxville. Maybe we could reach out to Brandon Hughes and those guys out there at the East Tennessee Libertarian Party and try to organize something with that. I'd like to get that guy in Tennessee, just to get people to get him in front of a bunch of people, because as to what you're saying, Robert, he can speak to so much more things in such a logical manner and in order, so you can understand it. That it just makes sense. I think it's something that people need to come to terms with. And the way that, for example, the way him and Dave Smith brought it into conversation was really relatable and understandable. That I think it's about time, our young people, I don't want this next generation, the generation I'm teaching during the days and at nights and all my classes, I don't want them growing up being force-fed something. I want them to have the ability to think for themselves, make their own mind up. And I think it's important to get a guy like that out there. Robert, what do you think about it? Are we going to succeed or not in our lifetime? You think we're going to succeed in our lifetime?
I didn't think the Soviet Union would break up in my lifetime, and that happened 30 years ago. So I've got hopes, that I grew up, they got missiles pointed at us. We got missiles pointed at them, and that's the way life's going to be until the end of times. And they broke up, and it was mostly peaceful, wasn't it? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people died in small things over there trying to sort out who was going to be in power, but there was no civil war like we had in the United States with 600,000 dead people.
Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, and Mississippi are going to form a southern Ukraine after the secession happens.
One of the dynamics I think is working against secession to an extent is that in the past, secession movements were largely based upon geopolitical factors and sectional differences, but now I think more of the political divide in the country is actually basically like rural versus urban, right? So it's not so cut and dry and easy as, this part of the country leaves, this part of the country doesn't. Now you have each state having microcosms of political divides within its own state. So just another factor to consider too.
Right. I've told people for years that I have more in common with a guy from rural upstate New York than I do a guy in Nashville.
Except this one.
Well, except for you, we're speaking generalities here.
Yeah, I totally understand. You're so right about that, though.
It's a totally different mindset.
How's the shutdowns in Nashville going, Dave? Are they lightening up? Is it getting any better?
It's getting a little bit better. They've kind of eased some restrictions on some of the capacity things. Unfortunately, I do live in Davidson, which is the most restrictive, maybe less restrictive than Memphis County. I'm not sure, but like in the adjacent county, I live right across the street though from Williamson, and Williamson's completely dropped their mask mandate completely. So they're a little bit freer. I'm glad that at least Tennessee went by a county by county approach, even though I suffered some of the worst of it as far as in my county, but it is getting a little bit better. It's interesting that even in my county in Nashville, the restaurants were only closed in their entirety for, I want to say maybe like 2 months or maybe a little bit less. So it wasn't that long that things were closed entirely here, at least. But what about you guys? It's pretty lax in Knox County, right?
Yeah, we officially have a mask mandate here, and I go to Walmart, and that people were complaining last fall that because our county was like in the top 5 in the nation for new cases, and everybody in my county was freaking out, and they would say, no, people aren't wearing their masks. I'm like, I go to Walmart and I see 80-90% of the people wearing masks. I'm not, but I see, everybody else is. Because I would go in and do an informal poll and say, all right, there are 5 of us in here without it. And I probably saw 45, 50 people while I was, running in to get a couple things. So what are we at, 80-90% at least, but they're not enforcing it that I know of. I went into a fast food restaurant recently and I was like, oh man, there's a cop's car out here, and I won't say what agency he was with. And I'm like, here we go. I'm gonna go in without my mask, but I went in, he didn't have his on. So I thought, well, this is good. It's all working out here. But I was just glad when my problem with when they were trying to come up with things at first was this should not be a national thing. New York State is entirely different than Oklahoma, than Tennessee, California, and when you bring it down to Tennessee, we're different than Nashville. Our population density here has got to be way less than Nashville. And there are counties here that have to be way less than my county. So it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. It should be, it's just like with secession, decentralization, take it down to the finest, most granular thing you can. And ideally, there are no mask mandates anywhere except at the private business. The private business says, hey, we want you to wear it. Fine, I'll wear it. And I have. If a store says they want you to wear it, I put it on, I go in. If they have the sign up that says, due to local ordinances, you need to wear one, most of the time I don't, because it's not the store, it's the government requesting it at that point. So it needs to be as decentralized as possible, like all laws, I think.
In Campbell County, I was just going to say Campbell County, it's been pretty relaxed as well. I remember when cases were soaring and they had shut down Sunday schools. Now we were still going to church in person. Sunday school was shut down. And like the pastor was like, Zeb, I know you're libertarian. We're going to ask people to wear masks. And I was like, I don't care. I'll wear a mask as long as we can still come to church. He's like, yeah, that's fine. So I remember wearing a mask in church, and the elderly couple in front of me that sits in the pews in front of us, she turned around and says, you take that thing off. We're not worried about that. And I said, and me and Ashley looked at each other like we took it off, and we're thankfully we're back open. Sunday school's back up. We had 125 people in our church last Sunday. That was great. But it's been relaxed. I'm just happy. Yeah, I'm like you, Dave. I agree 100%. I'm happy it's been a bit more relaxed in Tennessee. I'll say it like that.
Yeah, I've learned to frequent the restaurants that never ask me to put it on. I always have one in my back pocket because there are some instances where I would put it on to do the proverbial token walk to the table. But there's to meet my parents per se when I didn't want to say, Mom and Dad, I'm going to protest this, not wear a mask, and if they kick us out, we can't eat lunch today. I wouldn't do that, but I have been to places where they have asked me to put a mask, and then I go to the adjacent restaurant next door and eat there. Just bring your money next door. But yeah, we had some people install a refrigerator, and I said the same thing. Like, hey, man, we don't care about mask voodoo. You can take it right off. And he's like, oh, thanks. Just like right out the house, ripped it off, you know. It's funny. Everyone has. I try to respect people with a different view on these things, but I just don't like the government imposing it. It'd be one thing if, you know, a local mom and pop shop, independent of government, decides to institute that. They have that's their right as a private company to do it, and then I don't have to shop there. What I do have a problem with is government imposing coercion on businesses to require that. That I think is much more egregious.
Or just to shut them down, shut their doors. You're not doing business today.
Right,
give it 5 years, we'll give you a UBI.
There you go.
I mean, it's just crazy. It's insanity.
I
agree 100%.
They shouldn't put that on the stores to enforce that. You know, the retired guy working at the front door of Walmart should not be the one enforcing the county's mask mandate. It shouldn't be there, you know. Right. And as far as I can tell, they generally don't. They just, people come in, they offer a mask sometimes. I think
a lot look the other way at this point.
Yeah. They either don't offer masks at Walmart anymore, or they've given up hope on me. So, well, gentlemen, we got anything else here, or we reached the end of this thing?
I think we're at the back end of it. We're gonna, Dave. We're gonna give you the last say. Whatever you want to plug in there. I know you're active, one of the leaders in the Mises Caucus in Tennessee. First of all, before we let you plug in what you need to, I just want to say thank you for all the historical stuff you post all the time,
yes.
Like the excerpts and the context and how you put it in order. And it's like, oh, that has relevance to today. Or wow, I didn't know that. So thanks for that, man. But yeah, we're gonna let you have the final say, brother.
Yeah, thanks, Zevin. Thanks, Robert. History is definitely my true passion. I'm the author of 2 books, Compact of the Republic, The League of States, and the Constitution being my first. And the 14th Amendment and the Incorporation Doctrine is my other one. You can pick both up on Amazon. Or if you want my main book, Compact of the Republic, go to www.compactoftherepublic.com. As you said, Zev, I'm a proud member of the Mises Caucus of the Libertarian Party. I'm happy to see our faction expanding radically lately,
yes.
Especially in the last year. It's very awesome. I also contribute to the Mises Institute, 10th Amendment Center, Abbeville Institute, and intellectual takeout on various articles. You can find those things just on my website, www.davebenner.com. So I really appreciate both you guys having me. I'm sure I will see both of you in person pretty soon, and look forward to future conversations. Wish you the best luck with your podcast, and drop me a link in my message box, and I'll be happy to share this. So.
All right, appreciate it. Thanks, Dave. Zeb, catch you next time.
Yeah, we're out of here.
Peace, guys.